Welcome to the Knowledge Point Ideas. Today we are going to learn the basic concept of API, which means Application Programming Interface. This video will provide the basic idea regarding the API concept. Let me move to the topic brief. What do you mean by API? Actually, the definition of API is the Application Programming Interface, which means the abbreviation is Application Programming Interface. When you are working with two applications, that two application needs to communicate between them. So, all of the functions and the collection and the procedures and methods are available in the API. The API is a medium which act as a mediator between two applications. So, all of the collection function procedures between the application will be stored upon this API. The main purpose of this API concept to provide the service and provide the communication between two software components, which means two applications. Can you please imagine that you are using the WhatsApp, where the WhatsApp you are using and sharing the Google Map. So you are working with two different applications. The one is WhatsApp, the another one is Google Map. At that point, the API is a mediator which communicates between the WhatsApp and the Google Map. Then only you can get all of the collection and function and procedures. According to that, only you can communicate between both of them. Let me see how API works. Actually, when we are using the application, this application will called as application client. If you are using the WhatsApp will be called as application or a client. This client or the application will send the API request to the server, which means the request or a response provider. Then the server responds for this request from the client. This is the process of the API function. Let me see in brief. Actually, in earlier, I have said related the API is Application Programming Interface, which helps to communicate between two programs we can use via the web domain, which means the web server, because we are accessing the data through the web domain and we are transferring the data through the web server. Actually, the client is the application that we are going to use or that we are currently using. From this client application, the data has been transferred or transmitted through the server. Here, the type of the data should be HTTP request. Client will send the HTTP request through the GET method or any of the method. Then the data will receive to the server. This is the server. The server receives the data from the client. Actually, here there are three processes: request, receive, response. Client request, API call is initiated by the client by the HTTP request. Then the server receives the request from the client through the API. Then if the request is valid only, the server will be responded to the request provided by the client. So if the request valid only, the server will send the response regarding the request from the client. So that is the concept. I'll explain the API concept through the real scenario. Can you please assume that you are going to the restaurant? So I'm the customer. So I'm going to the restaurant. First step, I need to book the table in the restaurant. After that, the waiter will provide the meals from the chef as per my order. So at that time, the waiter acts like a API. The chef acts like another application, and the customer, me, acts like another application. So the intermediate is waiter. The customer and chef will not communicate between each other because the intermediate is waiter. So the waiter acts like a API, which means the waiter collect the menu from the customer, then the waiter will transmit all of the information from the customer related meals uh, and inform to the chef. According to the information collected from the waiter only, chef prepare the meals. After the preparation of the meals, the waiter will collect the meals from the chef and serve to the customer. That is the process. Here, there is no interaction between the customer and the chef. The waiter will communicate between the customer and chef. As like that, two or more applications communicate by the API. API collects and processes a response, then returns with that response. As a waiter would return and completed meal from the chef to the customer. So this is the simple example that we can concatenate with a real scenario and the API scenario. Let me see how does an API work. Actually, the end user, which means the user using any of the application. Can you please assume that you're using the Facebook? So you're the end user of the Facebook. If you're using the Instagram or if you're using the calculator application, you're the end user of the calculator application or the Instagram application. Then the end user will access the database through the API. API will connect with all of the database to access record information sending from the end user. Because end user send the request to access the request information, from that only the end user will get the response from the particular database through the API. Let me compare the web service versus API. Actually, the web service is the normal thing. When you're going to the website, you need to just put the URL of your website. Then only you can get the response from the server. Then your client PC will display the requested details upon your web page. That is the normal thing. The internal system, which means your system, local system, send the request to the HTTP via the HTTP request. Then the server will respond to the HTTP to the client. Then you can observe the results. But here the API concept, normal user client, your device will send the request to the API. Then the API responds to the client. Here the API, which means that we are accessing the data source through the API. Here we are getting the HTTP request. Here we are accessing the data source. Here we are accessing through the internal system. Here we are accessing through the data source with the help of the API. Those are the types of APIs. We can classify the types into 5 categories. They are SOAP API, third JSON, XML, JSON API, REST API. Let me see briefly about the types classification in our upcoming videos. Please be in touch. We can classify the API types as per the usage. The classification will be into 4 categories. They are database API, remote API, operating system API, and web API. Actually, when you are going to use the database, you need to get the database API. This will enable communication between an application to the another database management system. When you want to connect your operating system API, you can see several different operating systems such as Linux, Ubuntu, Windows, Mac. So you can define how application use the resources and services of operating system through the operating system API. Through the remote API, you can define the basic standards of interactions for applications running on different machines. Through the web API, which this provides the machine readable data and functionality transfer between web-based system, which represent the clients and server architecture, because we are accessing the data through the client server architecture. Because the client send the request, then the server will provide the response according to the client request. Here, those are the best example of Open API. We are using the Google Places API, such as Google Map, Google Earth, Twitter API, Google Analytics. We are use this concept in the data analytic. Dropbox, we can store multiple cloud-based storage, Upwork API, and Spotify API. Those are the Open API examples. Here we can use the API in real world scenario. If you are going to log in for any of the application, you can use the login via the Google or login via the Twitter or login via the Instagram option. You don't need to create or sign up the user account again. So that is the API, which means the Google is another application which allows, the API allows to interact with another application. Through that only you can access the another application. As well, if you are going to share the location through your WhatsApp, you can interact both WhatsApp and Google Map through different applications. As like that, if you're going to order the food through the Pizza Hut application, you need to pay that after the ordering completion. That time you need the PayPal access to pay your money. So this is the collaboration of 3 or more applications. So at that time you need a API. I hope you can well understood the concept of the API concept. Let me meet in another video. Thank you.